the core of what enabled me to go from no boundaries for 50 something years to having such healthy boundaries that I'm a coach, a boundaries coach now, is that I've come to care more what I think of me than what other people do. And this doesn't mean I don't care at all what other people think. Of course I do. What it means is I used to be willing to throw my integrity out the window and lie and try to get you to like me. So that's called manipulation. And I'm not willing to do those things anymore. So I've heard it said it's fine to seek people's approval, but only if you have your own approval first. So if you're going to do something to get someone's approval and you feel like shit about it, don't do it. But if you're going to do something to get someone's approval and you feel proud of yourself, have at it. But I'm no longer willing to compromise my integrity so that you'll like me. I want you to like me, but I don't like with claws, like need you to like me the way that I used to.
This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney Ann Jenkins. Hello and welcome to the 93rd episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and the rewards that come from following it. In this episode, I have with me Barb Nangle. Barb is a boundaries coach, speaker, and the founder and CEO of Higher Power Coaching and Consulting, and host of the podcast Fragmented to Whole: Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. In 2015, at the age of 52, after decades of therapy and tons of self-help work in a variety of areas, Barb found herself in a 12-step recovery. She's been in 2 such fellowships since then, and she has changed deeply and profoundly as a result. As a former addict and people-pleasing rescuer, she empowers people to thrive and take more control over their personal and professional lives by coaching them to build healthy boundaries. She works with organizations in the helping professions, as well as women entrepreneurs, to avoid burnout and reduce turnover. Her specialty is working with professional women who say yes when they really want to say no and neglect themselves because they're focused on others. I found this conversation with Barb really important and vulnerable and raw and honest and a really important conversation that I feel is really relevant to so many people today, and understanding the need for boundaries and finding validation within your own self. So here is my episode with Barb. Excellent. So the theme of my podcast is about following the inner authentic voice, or the intuition, or whatever word you would like to describe that thing within you. And one of the first things that I like to ask my guests is, especially because you are guiding people to find that authenticity within themselves, you must have personally gone through a lot of things yourself in order to be able to be that guide for others. And so, when is the first time that you realized and recognized that you had this inner voice of your own?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I didn't know that I wasn't authentic. Um, and I think it was when I got into 12-step recovery that I started to see how utterly inauthentic I was. I mean, there are parts of me that are, they've always been who I swear, for example. I've always sworn. I've always been into personal development and personal growth and that sort of thing. Like those are like authentic to who I am. But like I'm a former like people pleaser, rescuer, fixer, chameleon. So, and I was proud of that. I was like, oh yeah, I can fit anywhere. If you really can fit anywhere, then you can't fit in anywhere because you don't know who your people are. But what's really interesting is that there's something that happened through the process of 12-step recovery where I can look back now at my life before and see with crystal clarity, here's what I was doing, here's what I was thinking, and here's what my motives were. Whereas at the time it was happening, I was completely blind to it. So there's on some level there had to be an awareness of it because how would I be it feels like how would I be able to see it now?
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I can see is that I had all these different facades up, all these masks. And so I have a podcast and it's called Fragmented to Whole Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery, because that's another thing that I can see looking back and see that, oh my God, I felt like I was a bunch of these fragmented pieces floating around in space. And I had space between the fragments, which meant other people's shit could leak into my territory. And the process of recovery, especially the part where I built healthy boundaries, helped me to integrate those fragments into one coherent whole. And it also helped me get rid of those fragments that were not authentically me. Well, I think one of the many ways that I became fragmented was having all these facades.
Mm.
Because I'm like, okay, to fit in over here, I have to talk like this. To fit in over here, I have to act like this. So I became fragmented for those reasons. I think also I truly believed that I was an honest person before I got into 12-step recovery. No, nope. I lied about cigarettes. I lied about drugs. I lied about alcohol. I lied about relationships. Mostly I lied in the people pleasing department. I said things were okay with me when they were not. I said things were fine with me when they were not. I said I liked things that I didn't. I acted like I didn't like things that I did because I was afraid to be judged or rejected. When people would say, "How are you?" I'd be like, "I'm fine." No, I'm not. Would you like some help? No, I don't need help. I've got this. All lies. And so I think that also leads to the fragmentation. And so like, I just didn't know that I wasn't authentic. I used to say to people, I'm an open book. Well, what I was doing was I was like vomiting too much information on people with things they didn't even want to know about. And frankly, often didn't earn the right to have that kind of private information. Meanwhile, I wasn't sharing authentically with people things that actually lead to intimacy. Like, these are my fears. These are my hopes. This is what I'm feeling right now. This is not okay with me. Can you help me? Like, those are the kinds of things that I've learned to figure out because I was doing a lot of hiding,
Yeah,
and that's the opposite of authentic.
absolutely. Do you mind if we go back to your childhood for a moment?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. It's where it
If
all began.
Right. Yeah. So what was your environment like growing up, and how did you learn to start the people pleasing? Like, was it ever something that you did to protect yourself, or
I mean, I was born doing it. I
yeah.
don't, there was no beginning of it. Yeah. So I grew up, in Tolland, Connecticut, which is a suburban town. I would say that we were like lower middle class and made it up to like middle class. My dad was college educated. He opened up a pharmacy in town when I was 8. And my mom was back then, it was called a secretary, and she worked many places, but the longest stint was at the University of Connecticut. My older brother was a super, like, he was an intellectual at like 5.
Oh, wow.
Being smart was really important in my family. I lived in a house in a neighborhood, like, I lived in a safe place. We always had food. I didn't lack for anything. I didn't have the kind of parents that told me, you're a piece of shit and you're never going to amount to anything. And so what the hugest part of my 12-step recovery that I've alluded to has been in a program that's called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. It's a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and you use the 12 steps to recover. I didn't know I qualified. I don't identify as a child of an alcoholic. I did not know that I had childhood trauma. I didn't understand intergenerational family dysfunction. And when I got into that program, it was really clear that I did not objectively have it as bad as many of the other people in the recovery rooms as me. But I knew that I had the traits of an adult child. So there's a list of 14 traits of an adult child, which is affectionately called the laundry list. And when I first read it, Whitney Ann, I thought I had 7 of them. As time went on and I came out of denial, found out I had 13 of them. So my trauma was much more like the what I call like the emotional like drip of or excuse me, the continual drip of emotional invalidation and gaslighting and that sort of thing. So my first 6 months in that program, I was like kind of making excuses for why I was there and why I deserved to be there because I knew I had some of the traits. I just didn't know how I got them. And then when I learned that trauma can result from the absence of good things happening, I was like, oh, okay. I've later heard it said that trauma can result from unmet needs. And for me, my main unmet needs were predictability, emotional safety, emotional validation. It was just like not like feelings are not a thing. Like we're not like humans are feeling beings. This is the language of humanness is feelings. And that was like not happening in my family. And that is traumatizing. And so I I started going to therapy when I was about 15. I got introduced to the whole self-help genre in my early 20s. I am just an explorer and a seeker by nature and I've taken just about every personality assessment that there is. And I thought I knew myself really well. Oh my God, I was so wrong. And, I think of I'm in 12-step recovery for in ACA, but I'm also in Overeaters Anonymous. So I'm down over 100 pounds from my top weight. I initially got in it for codependence, and that to me, codependence is my core wound, and that comes from trauma. And I think the reason that I ate was because of the codependence. And I drank abusively until I was in my early 40s, and I smoked bales of weed for many years. I did all of that stuff too because of the codependence. But the root cause of all that was the trauma. And so, like, my family on the outside did not look like a family where people are traumatized. But, we often, like, something dramatic would happen that was problematic and we would never talk about it again, but we would talk ad nauseum about like politics and the weather and stuff like that. And, like pretending that stuff isn't happening is very damaging. So I'll give you an example, which may not sound like a big deal, but it is. My mom secretly smoked cigarettes for many years. And when I was about 10, I found her cigarettes in her purse and I was like, oh my God, because I remembered that when I was little, I had found a pack of cigarettes and they were cool cigarettes. And we had a family friend named Linda who smoked cool cigarettes. And I was so little that, you know how you think so concretely when you're little? To me, cool cigarettes equals Linda's cigarettes. So I said, Mommy, why do you have Linda's cigarettes? And she asked me to hold them onto her. So here I am, 5 or whatever years later, at the age of 10, going, oh my God, those weren't Linda's cigarettes. Those were my mom's. My mom's been lying to me for as long as I can remember. And then when I was probably about 12, we took a vacation, my mom and us kids, because my dad worked every day of the week. So traumatizing for children to have workaholic parents. We took a road trip out to Missouri, where my mom is from. And at the first rest stop, my mom was like, I have something to tell you, kids. I've started smoking again, and I can't make it on this trip. And we were like, okay, we all knew that she smoked, but we weren't talking about it. She smoked openly on that trip. I remember her mom saying, when did you start smoking again? Because we knew that she was smoked when she met my dad, and we had seen photos, and it was like a big issue, and she quit for my dad. We come back home, and she goes back in the closet with smoking. That may not sound like a terribly damaging thing for children, but that will screw you up because I'm having this authority figure in my life tell me we have to pretend things are not happening that everybody knows is happening. And like when you're little, you're trying to understand how does the world work? So you already don't know what's going on. You already think concretely, you can't think abstractly, and then you're getting misinformation, but you're not being told with words the misinformation. It's all through all these like subtle nonverbal signals,
Mhm.
and it's damaging.
Yeah, and it also probably reflects on your ability to be able to trust your
And so it's
yeah.
interesting that you say that because my older brother's a year and a half older than me. I remember being 16 years old and having a conversation with him where I said, I trust people until they give me a reason not to. And he was like, hell no, I don't trust anybody until they give me reason to. And I always thought what I said to him was true. But when I got in recovery, I realized I don't trust people until they give me reason not to. I continue to trust people even when they give me reason not to. And then when they violate my trust in a big way and I can't deny it, I get mad at them for being untrustworthy. Meanwhile, they've been untrustworthy the whole time. And my part, which is what I learned to seek in recovery, is what have I been doing in my life that's creating chaos and drama or exacerbating chaos around me? My part was that I trusted them in the first place. And yet I still made it seem like they're the villain because they violated my trust when they've been violating your trust all along. It just got to the point where you couldn't deny it any longer.
Wow. So I think this is probably a good segue into boundaries, which seems to be something that you are very proficient in coaching people with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now I am. Yes.
I personally have struggled with boundaries for much of my life and just am starting to understand them because I feel like boundaries have sort of a negative connotation sometimes and that it's taking away your freedom. So would you like to talk about your experience with boundaries?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of myths and misconceptions about boundaries, and this is one reason why I tell people when you're setting boundaries with people, please don't call them boundaries. Please don't use the word boundaries when you're setting boundaries because there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about it. A lot of people think they're like walls. And like if you have a violent person in your life, you need a wall with them. So yeah, okay, there are some boundaries that are like walls, but that's like less than 1% of way less than 1% of boundaries are like walls. You know, the way that I think of them, Whitney Ann, is that they're standards that you have for your life and limits that you have for yourself and other people to uphold those standards. So let me give you an example. Health is a really easy one because most people can identify it. So I mentioned, I've drank heavily, smoked, weighed a lot more. So health is super important to me. I'm 61 years old. I really want to live to 100. I got to make up for lost time. So I have some health standards. So some limits, like just a very basic limit I have for myself is I don't stay up past 11:30 at night. I don't stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning watching Netflix all night long and then try to roll out of bed in the morning. Like I don't do that. Like I need sleep. Right. And so it's a limit I have for myself. A limit I have for other people is you can't smoke in my house. Like I want a healthy home. So you can't smoke in my house. And then, so those are ideas of limits. Then there are other types of boundaries. So for example, I have some financial boundaries that uphold my health. So I pay for a direct primary care physician who is a lifestyle and family medicine on top of my insurance because she promotes health, whereas our healthcare system like fixes diseases. Like I need that, but I really want someone to promote my health. So I pay for that. I pay for meditation. I pay for yoga. I pay for healthy food. Sometimes I eat organic food. I have time boundaries to support my health. So I do yoga, I do meditation twice a day. I prepare most of my own food. So I have to set aside time. So those are some examples of what boundaries can look like. What most people think about with boundaries are the boundaries that they're communicating to other people. So, like if someone like just like so that we don't have to get into any like really difficult conversations. Let's say, so here's something for me. So my name is actually Barbara, but I go by Barb. I cannot stand being called Barbara. And like I wish it didn't bother me as much as it does, but it does. And so there's something about the name Barb that people very frequently just automatically turn it into Barbara. And I will say, please call me Barb. And I say that and they keep calling me Barbara. So what I finally started doing was saying, please call me Barb. When you call me Barbara, I feel like I'm in trouble.
Mhm.
And they laugh and they stop calling me Barbara. Somehow it works for me to say I feel like I'm in trouble. I don't know if it's just that I'm giving an explanation of any kind or if it's that they can identify with that, parents calling you by your full name kind of thing. But I wish I didn't care, but I do care. Like I'm not going to have an authentic relationship with you if you keep calling me Barbara. So
Hmm.
my boundary is my name is Barb. And so if somebody kept calling me Barbara and kept calling me Barbara, I would eventually say to them, listen, I've asked you a few times to call me Barb. I'm not sure what's going on here that you don't feel like you want to call me Barb, but I'm not going to continue. I'm not going to respond to you or acknowledge you until you start calling me Barb. Like, so I wouldn't start with that. I would start with, please call me Barb. And then if they say it again, actually now I'm at the point where I don't even just say, please call me Barb. I say, please call me Barb. When you call me Barbara, I feel like I'm in trouble.
Yeah, there's a couple places I kind of want to go because you said that you were people pleasing. So
Hmm.
that seems like a big ask for someone who said that they were people pleasing. So
Hmm.
it also reflects your self-worth when you are able to like set boundaries as you
Hmm.
described for your health. So
Hmm.
can you talk a little bit about when you first discovered boundaries and how you could apply them to your life?
Hmm. So I learned how to build healthy boundaries in the context of 12-step recovery. It's not like someone sat me down and was like, okay, we're going to build boundaries. I did not know that was what I was doing at the time. I really didn't. And I learned to build boundaries through this like haphazard, meandering process through 12-step recovery over a period of 2 to 3 years. In the beginning, I felt like I was going to die. Like I'm not exaggerating. I'm talking about an internal emergency, all alarms going off internally. The first time that I can actually remember that I'm going to set a boundary was with an ex-boyfriend via email. So he emailed me and used to feel like I have to open it right now and I have to respond immediately. And in the step group I was working in, the 12 step group I was working in with these women, they were like, you actually don't have to open it right now and you don't have to reply right away. And I was like, oh my God, he's going to think I'm a bad person. They're like, he doesn't know when you're opening. Like, this is an ex-boyfriend, Whitney Ann. Okay. Like, I'm not in relationship with this person anymore. I don't see him anymore. And yet I felt like I was a bad person. I felt like my life was under threat because that's how deep like the people pleasing was. So I've gone from that to my ability to stand very firm in who I am and what my boundaries are. And occasionally when I set a boundary, I might have like a little like trickle of feeling in me. It's not like this waterfall of shitty inner drugstore chemicals, shame and guilt coming down on me the way that it used to. And it comes with practice. And you mentioned you have to have a certain level of like self-worth or self-esteem. Well, I feel like I always liked myself and I kind of had decent self-esteem. What I learned in recovery was I didn't have self-worth and I didn't love myself. And truth be told, when I look back, I'm like, how did I build self-worth and how did I build self-love? For me, it was actually the boundary building process. Because when you're building boundaries, you are getting to know yourself. Because I didn't know what was okay and not okay with me because I was such a yes woman. I said yes because I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. I didn't want to make waves. I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to cause trouble. I want everybody to be happy. I don't want anybody to be upset with me. Right. And so, how could I know what I like? Because I've yes to everything. Now, there's some things, of course, I know, but other things I didn't. So, for example, I have been a Dallas Cowboys fan twice. I've been a New York Giants fan. I have been a New England Patriots fan. I don't like football. Okay, I know that now. But I felt like I was being a good girlfriend when I was dating the people who were fans of those teams. I know like a lot about football for someone who is not a football fan. I was just talking to somebody today. I don't even understand soccer at all. Football, I understand. Baseball, I understand. Hockey, I understand. But because I've dated people who played those sports, or been big fans of those sports. Meanwhile, I am not a sports fan. right? But because I just abdicated my personality to glom onto and fit into the world because I thought that's what I needed to do. And when I look back, it's like, well, those behaviors started as a child. Like, don't make waves, don't cause trouble, don't bring attention to yourself. And the way you do it is to be agreeable. And then if you add the context of patriarchy on top of that, it's not that men don't have poor boundaries. There's plenty of men with poor boundaries. But I think it's actually a lot worse for women because we're groomed to be kind and gentle and helpful and like one of the worst things you can say to a woman is you're selfish. Right?
Mm.
So the idea that you should have preferences and put yourself first is like, oh my God, I don't want people to think I'm selfish. I actually had a client tell me one time, I'd rather be called a whore than selfish. Like, what's going on in our society that a woman would rather be called a whore than selfish? And the reality is, it is not selfish to put yourself first. If you think about if you've ever ridden an airplane, they say, hey, if the oxygen mask comes down, you put it on yourself first before the person that you're helping. What they don't say is because if you're passed out, you can't help them. So I learned this concept from Ashley Kirkwood. She wrote the book Speak Your Way to Cash. She says you don't want to pour from an empty cup. You want to pour from the overflow. Well, the only way you can have overflow is if you fill your cup first, which means you have to take care of yourself first. You have to have boundaries in your life so that you're constantly filling your cup. You're never pouring from the cup, you're pouring from the overflow. And if you think about it, who would you rather receive from? Someone who's trying to squeeze something out of the bottom of an empty cup, or someone who is pouring from the overflow? And then if you think about if you're a mom and you're doing that, you're teaching your children, I'm expendable. And for the girls, when you grow up, you're going to be expendable too,
Mhm. Yeah.
and you're not expendable. And so what happens in the process of building healthy boundaries is you get to know yourself because you start to figure out this is okay with me and this is not okay with me. I like this, I don't like that. You start showing up for yourself and following through for yourself in a way you probably never have before, which means you feel better about yourself. On top of the fact that your life is better because you're doing more stuff that you like and less stuff you don't like. You're doing more things that bring you energy and less things that drain your energy. And you're the person that's giving that to yourself. And eventually you grow to like yourself and feel worthy. And so it becomes easier and easier and easier to uphold your boundaries. Now, you don't have to wait until you feel great about yourself to set boundaries. It gets easier and easier and easier. And the other thing that happens is, like, for me, the core of what enabled me to go from no boundaries for 50 something years to having such healthy boundaries that I'm a coach, a boundaries coach now, is that I've come to care more what I think of me than what other people do. And this doesn't mean I don't care at all what other people think. Of course I do. What it means is I used to be willing to throw my integrity out the window and lie and try to get you to like me. So that's called manipulation. And I'm not willing to do those things anymore. So I've heard it said it's fine to seek people's approval, but only if you have your own approval first. So if you're going to do something to get someone's approval and you feel like shit about it, don't do it. But if you're going to do something to get someone's approval and you feel proud of yourself, have at it. But I'm no longer willing to compromise my integrity so that you'll like me. I want you to like me, but I don't like with claws, like need you to like me the way that I used to. And I think a huge part of that is that I actually like me now because I am a woman of integrity. I
Mhm.
I live in alignment with my values. I thought I was a values-oriented person before I got into recovery. I also thought I was honest. No, I wasn't.
Was there a moment or an event that happened to get you to the point of going to recovery? Like, was there
Yes,
yeah.
yes, absolutely. I would love to tell that story. So, I volunteered at my church for a project to serve homeless people in the fall of 2014. And around that same time, a homeless guy named Dan started coming to my church as a parishioner, and he and I became very friendly. And sort of took it as a sign from God, like, oh, here's God, like handing you a homeless person as a friend, so that when you lead this project, the homeless people are personified. Like they're not just the homeless. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. Well, I would say 2 or 3 months into our friendship, we had a really big snowstorm here in New Haven, Connecticut. And so I invited Dan to stay at my home instead of in a homeless shelter. Now, I now know that is not normal behavior, but I was like, I'm nice, I thought I was nice. So he did. And then he stayed another time and another time. And within a few weeks, he was practically living with me, and I felt trapped in my own home. So he was a self-proclaimed addict and alcoholic. He wasn't actively drinking when he started, when I first met him, but that changed. And one day I was in therapy and I was talking about him, and I stopped in the middle of a sentence and I went, oh my God, do you think I need to go to Al-Anon? And my therapist was like, yes. So just in case there's people listening and they don't know what Al-Anon is, and maybe they don't know what 12-step recovery is, I'll just take a minute to talk about that. So Alcoholics Anonymous was the first 12-step recovery program ever, and it started in the 1930s, and it was the first time in human history that droves of alcoholics were able to stop drinking and stay sober for long periods, for years or for life. Well, the second 12-step recovery program ever developed was called Al-Anon, and this is for the loved ones of alcoholics. And you may ask, why do loved ones of alcoholics need a program? Well, partly it's because alcoholism is a family disease. It's not just the drinker that participates in the dysfunction of the disease. And what we tend to do as the loved ones of alcoholics to try to get our loved one to stop drinking, to get sober, to go into recovery, to go to rehab, to get to detox, those things that we try to do to get them to do that backfire. We become really controlling. We basically make them the center of our lives, and their drinking or not drinking the center of our lives. They get resentful for us trying to control them. Then they use us as an excuse to drink more. And the dynamic goes on and on and on and on. So now Dan went to AA meetings. He went there mainly to get warm and drink coffee, though he did use the language of recovery, but he never actually actively worked the 12 steps. So that's probably why I thought of Al-Anon. So whatever I put into Google looking for Al-Anon, I came across the word codependent, and I was like, wait, what? Now, I was 52. I am extremely well read in the self-help genre. I've been in therapy at that point for 37 years, not continuously, but mostly. I'm not dumb. Never heard the word codependent. And I was like, wait, what? So I started going to Codependence Anonymous. Very quickly felt a sense of relief. I think partly understanding there's this thing, it's almost like codependence is kind of like an umbrella term. It's not like it's more like a syndrome, like you would think about in the medical world. It's a constellation of behaviors. And so partly understanding, like, here's a thing, there's recovery from it. I'm not the only person. And I very quickly said to somebody, I think I need to be reparented. But I thought I made that word up, Whitney Ann. I didn't know that that was a thing. Well, 6 weeks into my going to CODA or Codependence Anonymous, I went up to Cape Cod, Massachusetts to visit a couple friends, one of whom had been, at that point, she'd been in AA for 10 years. And she had, since I met her, had raved about how utterly transformed her life was as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm like, oh, you're going to love this. I'm going to Codependence Anonymous. And she said, oh my God, that's great. Let's see if we can find a CODA meeting while you're here and we'll go together. And I was like, okay, well, she couldn't, but she found an ACA meeting, which I knew of as ACOA. They're the same. And I knew of as Adult Children of Alcoholics. I now know it's called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, but I hadn't heard the and dysfunctional families part before. And I didn't think I qualified, but her dad's an alcoholic. So I'm like, I'll go for you. And I walk in, and in the opening readings, they said, we reparent ourselves. And I was like, what? What is this? And then they read that 14 traits of an adult child. And I was like, oh my God. Now my friend tells me I sobbed the whole meeting. I don't remember that. But I bought the literature. I came home to New Haven, Connecticut, started going to an ACA meeting, continued to go to CODA. Then a few weeks later, a women's ACA meeting started in New Haven. I started going to that. I still go to that. And then a few weeks later, a step group of me and three other women formed step group to actually work through the 12-step workbook. I did both of those for a year. And then after a year, I quit going to CODA because I felt like it was maybe a 75% fit, whereas ACA was 100% fit. And that turned out to be a higher powered thing for me because one of the women that I was doing the 12 steps with in ACA had started going to Overeaters Anonymous and had been talking in our step group about her thinking and behavior around food, especially sugar. And I was like, oh my God. And it was not, oh my God, what she was doing. It's that she was talking about it. And I was like, oh my God, I do that. So I didn't know it at the time, but she was trying to like gently sort of get me to go. And I went to a workshop with her and I was like, oh my God, I'm a compulsive overeater. I didn't even know that that was a thing. Never mind that I was that. And so I've been in ACA for 9.5 years and in OA for 8.5 years. And I've done the 12 steps in both programs. The steps are the same. The way you do them is different, but I've done them multiple times in both programs. And this is after a lifetime, as I've alluded to, therapy, self-help, workshops, workbooks. And the way I think of all that stuff that I did before recovery, Whitney Ann, was that that stuff scratched the surface of the iceberg of my life, and 12-step recovery melted the iceberg of my life. I think partly the 12 steps of recovery are an incredible technology. It's a stepwise process that you do in order that's proven to work. It's done with other people, some of whom are farther ahead and some who are behind you, and they've recovered. And it's a spiritual program. And I think, that's why. And then for me, addressing the trauma in the ACA program also, because that's really the core. I mean, we now know that the vast majority of addiction and mental health problems stem from trauma.
Yeah. So you mentioned the higher power within the 12-step program. And you
Mhm.
also described in your story about the homeless man who lived with you that you met him at a church function. So I'm
Mhm.
curious how going through the 12 steps changed your
Mhm.
connection or perception of a higher power.
Yeah, great question. So I want to start by saying that I was an agnostic until I was 37, lifelong agnostic. I read the book Conversations with God when I was in my mid 30s, and that caused me to go from being a lifelong agnostic to coming up with my own conception of God in a way that really worked for me because all the people that I met that were religious were a bunch of hypocrites. And I was like, no. And my older brother, who was he was a staunch atheist, but he had a huge influence on me. And I was like, no, like, no, there's something's going on here in this universe. None of those images that people talk about God work for me, but I don't think there's nothing. And so I really identified as a pretty spiritual person after having read Conversations with God. And so that was like mid 30s. So then I was 52 when I got in recovery. And I will say that 12-step recovery really almost like exploded my spirituality. So what I mean by that, like I happen to call my higher power God, I know that doesn't work for some people, but that works. Like in the beginning, I would spell it Godde because it was like happy between God and goddess, because the idea of God having gender is insane to me. Like clouds don't have gender, mountains don't have gender. Why would God have gender? Like what? Now I say he, I don't mean it. It's expeditious. It's just I'm not as invested anymore. And I spell it God when I ever do write it down. But I call my higher power God. And I think like a couple things that have massively changed for me is I use God in ways I just didn't before. So what I mean by that is I hand things over and actually experienced them being taken from me. That took a while. In the beginning, I didn't hand things over. I shoved things over. I'm like, no, seriously, God, I really need you to take this from me. And I used to think, oh, God's handing it back. No, I'm like, no, 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 that was me taking it back. I ask God for guidance all the time, and I typically get it. I turn my will and my life over to the care of God, like many times a day, and I make lots of conscious contact with my higher power throughout the day. I have certain prayers, a couple of which come from 12-step recovery that I say at minimum when I wake up in the morning and when I go to bed at night, usually multiple times during the day. I pray every time I eat, which for me, because I'm in a food recovery program. Personally, I eat 3 meals and 2 snacks a day, so that's a minimum of 5 times a day. My business is actually called Higher Power Coaching and Consulting,
Mhm.
partly because I'm higher powered now. And I coach from I don't typically say to people, hey, I'm checking in with my higher power, but I often will pray before I coach. But also because it's a flag for people in 12-step recovery, like, because that's a term that we use. And my ideal clients are professional women who say yes when they really want to say no and who neglect themselves because they're so focused on others. The vast majority of my clients are in 12-step recovery, and that's because of my podcast, because that's where I get most people. But I coach many people who are not, some of whom actually get into 12-step recovery after working with me because, they see like how much I've gotten out of it. And I can often help them say, like, this might be a good program for you and this might not. So I think I've lost track of where I was there. So hopefully I
No,
answered the
that was
question.
fantastic. Yeah. Um, so could you talk a little bit about how higher power connects to boundaries and self-trust?
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think part of getting to know yourself better is being able to discern that inner voice that you talk about. Is and to me, like technically, it's God. It's God in me. Because like my conception of God is really the all of everything plus a little bit more. So you know how when we say something is greater than the sum of the parts? Like I think of like God is the all of everything, but then there's more because the universe is greater than the sum of the parts. And so I feel like God is both something that I am part of because I'm part of the all of everything, but it's also something separate from me to which I can pray. That may not make sense to a lot of people. I don't care. I don't care. This isn't the only plane of existence, and everything doesn't have to make sense here. Logic does not rule. Love isn't logical, but we all know it exists and it's real. The wind isn't really logical, but we all know that it exists and it's real. And so I would say that getting closer to God helps me discern what's okay with me and what's not okay with me, that's what boundaries are, is knowing what's okay with you and what's not okay with you. Like I didn't, I overrode the signals. So I'll give you an example. Um, I'm gonna try not, okay, I won't be graphic. Okay, so my first 6 months in recovery, I thought I wasn't codependent anymore, which is hilarious. And I'm gonna call it sort of dating this guy, because that's the kind of thing I did all the time. If you are sort of dating someone, then you're not dating them, and you get to decide whether you're dating them or not. You don't need to leave it up to them. Like I didn't know any of that stuff, right? Well, he might as well have said, I am emotionally unavailable. He might as well have had that written on his head because he didn't want to do anything physical in person. He wanted to have phone sex. Well, one day he sent me a photo. I won't describe it, but you can probably guess what it maybe was. And my first reaction was this, but then I was aroused by it. Well, it took me a couple of years to realize that the reason that I went was because it was way too soon, but
Mhm.
I overrode it because it was arousing to me. And there was a show on Amazon that's called Transparent. It's about a transgender parent. Brilliant show. One of the characters in the show goes to a 12-step meeting called Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. And in that meeting, the character is an adult man who, starting at age 16, had a relationship with the babysitter. And he, his whole life, thought he was like Mr. Studley because he did that. And he didn't realize that it was actually traumatizing to him. And what he heard in the meeting that changed everything for him was arousal does not equal consent. Because he always assumed, well, I was aroused by it, so I must have consented to it. When
Oh.
I heard that character hear that, I was like, oh my God. When that guy sent me that photo and I went, oh, that was me going, not appropriate, way too soon, but I overrode it because of the arousal. And I assumed that because it was arousing to me, it must be okay with me. Now I understand. Now I can actually, like, I have boundaries between different concepts now that I didn't have before. Arousal does not equal consent. And as I'm saying that, I have another illustration that I think will be really helpful. My sweetheart that I'm with now, we've been together for over 6 years. This is the only healthy relationship I've ever been in, Whitney. And stuff comes out of my mouth in this relationship that is so healthy that I'm like, oh my God, who am I? How do I? And I think the reason I know what to do and say is because I tell the truth now. Well, about our third date, he said to me, I want you to look up, he has a chronic illness. He says, I want you to look up this word. It's going to tell you a lot about me. You seem interested in me. And I was like, you're right. I am interested in you. You have me curious. Now, even though I had dated other men that I had met on dating apps. So in other words, we both know why we're together. We're supposed to, I never had someone come out and say, like, you're interested in me, like I like you, you like me. There was always this weird communication. It was like, are we dating? Are we not dating? Are they gonna kiss me? Am I not? Like, it was just always awkward. So to have a man come right out and say to me, you seem interested in me, was like, this is amazing. And I said, yes, you have me curious. And what it made me realize, Whitney Ann, was that I realized I was interested in him, but I didn't yet know if I was attracted to him. Those two things had never been separate for me before. They were fused. To me, if if I'm interested in you, it must mean that I'm attracted to you. And for most men, there have been a couple of men over the years that have wanted to date me that I didn't want to date. But for the most part, if you like me, I must automatically like you. Like those things were fused for me. And I now have boundaries between these concepts
Mm.
as I've built healthier and healthier boundaries. And there's something that happens when you build healthy boundaries. I don't really understand it. It's almost like you start to exude this energetic force field where other people's stuff doesn't penetrate you. So I mentioned when I was talking about the fragmented pieces and other people's shit could leak into my territory. That doesn't happen anymore. I don't feel other people's feelings anymore. I am not like just stuff bounces off of me. I am not um completely shaken up when somebody freaks out in front of me or someone like yells, like some stranger comes, like that would be traumatizing to me in the past. But there's something that happens as you get better and better boundaries whereby this energetic force field sort of erupts around you. And it's not just me. I know I have clients who said the same thing. I have fellows in 12-step recovery who say the same thing. So the thing about boundaries is they permeate every single area of your life. And so, like, the idea that they mean one thing, like their walls, for example, is just, it's like, yeah, they can be walls, but sometimes you need walls, but most of the time they're not.
Yeah, it seems like also a pathway to your authenticity and being able to express that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's really, I talk about it more in the language of being in integrity with yourself and being in alignment with your values than I talk about authenticity. But to me, it's a different way of saying the same thing. And so when I coach clients, before we even start, the first thing I have them do is identify their top 5 values and write about those, because they're going to use those as guideposts for when and where to set boundaries. And it's utterly transformative for many of them. And some of them realize, oh shit, these aren't really my values, because I don't, those were my people pleasing values. Those were the values I thought I was supposed to have. But a lot of people, like, I don't know if it's just the crowds that I run in, but a lot of people are like, I don't know what my purpose is. I need to know my purpose. What's my purpose? Here's your purpose. Live in alignment with what's important to you. What are your values? And then live in accordance with them. Because your particular bundle of values is yours for a reason. You wouldn't have those as the things that matter to you for no reason. And if you simply live your life in such a way that you're upholding, supporting, and promoting those values, that is living like on purpose, on your purpose.
Yeah.
So stop worrying about having a purpose and just focus on what matters to you.
Yeah, and it's also not lying to yourself.
Precisely. Yes, that integrity.
Yes. Yes. Fantastic. If people would like to work with you, what is that process like?
So I have a 12-week private coaching program. It's 12 modules. So what I did, Whitney Ann, was I took that haphazard meandering path that I took through 12-step recovery and really distilled it down into a 12 module process so people can learn how to build boundaries in a matter of weeks rather than years, the way that I took. And I have a whole curriculum that I work with them. If it's something people are interested in, they can go to barbchat.net and sign up for a 30-minute Better Boundaries call with me. But so it's multimedia. So I do the bulk of the, actual coaching happens live on the call. But I also have a curriculum which includes PowerPoint presentations, podcast episodes, articles, and a workbook. So they do all the other things and then they go to the workbook, and I call those their weekly training exercises. So that's where they're taking all the things they've learned from me elsewhere and applying to them to their lives. I also stay connected to them via the Telegram Messenger app. So it's like having a coach in your pocket. They can text me 24/7. They can do voice memos back and forth with me as well. Um, but I'm often shocked that in a matter of often 4 to 6 weeks, the transformations that people have. I have a client right now who was actually referred to me by her daughter, who is a friend of mine, and and the client was here to meet her daughter for a stay for the holidays, and they came over. I had a craft date, and I met my client in person, and the daughter wants to give me a testimonial
Wow.
because she's seen and she's told me before how she's like, my mom is completely different. She talks different. Her mom is 62. She's not. So I often coach older women. It's not entirely, but often older women. Typically people who have been doing work a long time and they know all the things. They're just not able to follow through on them. And so those are the people that I tend to work well with. Like if you've never done any personal development work, I'm not the coach for you. But if
Yeah.
you've done a lot and you're like, it's not sticking, then I'm your woman.
Excellent. So I'll put all those links into the show notes so people can click on them and find you easily. And I really love that you are using how you healed your own wounds to help other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think the reason I'm such a good boundaries coach is because of my lived experience. So I know what it's like in my body to not have healthy boundaries. And I know what it's like in my body and in my soul to have healthy boundaries. And so not only can I teach you how to go from there to there, but I can articulate like the emotional experience of what it was like before so that I know what you're talking about. Like when I say I felt like I was going to die, I'm not exaggerating. Well, people who feel like they're going to die from even thinking of saying no, or like, oh, she knows what I'm talking about. She knows what I'm like because I was you. And I feel like, the fact that I was older, like I was in my 50s when it happened, I think that gives a lot of hope to people. Also, the fact that I was 55 when I met my sweetheart and he was 60, that gives a lot of people hope. Like it's never too late. And the other thing Like I haven't even touched on anything to do with what I do in ACA, the whole reparenting journey. Like I have done, especially the last 2 years, an enormous amount of inner work with my inner family members. And the healing from that has been profound. My father is deceased, and my father is the person that I had the most difficulty with. And I have transformed him in my mind, in my inner world, to an inner loving dad. And I've taken that version of my dad and gone back through incidents where he traumatized me as a child and redone them. And
Mhm.
that changes you. I changed my past. So, and it's never too late. Like, even if you were, like somebody said to me the other day, I'm 77, it's too late. No, it's not. If you had one day of healing and then died, it would be worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Is there anything that we haven't gone over that you feel like is on the top of your heart or your mind?
No, we've covered a lot and I so appreciate you. I mean, we've gone into a lot of detail that I often don't get to go into, partly because of the length of time, but also because you ask really good questions. So I really appreciate the opportunity to go into detail and hopefully that people will hear something that gives them a new idea about themselves and a new hope for the future. And, if they think that I'm the kind of person they seem like they want to work with, I'd love to hear from them. But if not, just know there's help and hope out there.
Thank you so much. I have one last question to wrap up, and that
Okay.
if your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
Keep the focus on yourself. People with poor boundaries are constantly focused on what is he doing? What is she doing? What are they doing? What does he need? What does she need? What does the situation need? What does the organization need? And it doesn't mean we don't ignore those things, but we start in here. What do I want and need? What do I like and prefer? Is this my business? Am I taking good care of myself? So it would say, keep the focus on yourself. That's my mantra.
Perfect. I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And keep up the fantastic work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay tuned in to you.